Greetings, this is Vane and welcome back to a new Let's Play, although it's more actually of an advanced Let's Replay of my abandoned Stellaris game. It's been 3 years now and the game has changed so much that it's actually quite shocking. There's a whole bunch of expansions out, way more than when I did my first abandoned Let's Play, but we're still going to go with the basic game just to see what's going to go on. So yeah, going to look at these, and I think we're going to play as the United Nations of Earth. Okay. Basically, the whole point is it's Earth. See, here's all the DLCs, and it's saying that I do not own. I own some of these, but I just haven't installed them for this game. So there's lots of options there, and they're still working on updates, even like 4 years in. It's one of the good things about Paradox games, really. Anyway, yeah. So the idea is we are Earth. And we're setting out to explore the galaxy. Now, they've already set up what humans are like. Apparently we are highly adaptive. So, well, we're not highly, we're adaptive, so we get a plus 10 habitability. So our planets, we can live, we get are more habitable for us. We're more used to roughing it. We're nomadic. So it costs less to resettle, and we think nothing of immigrating between planets if new planets are better than what we've got. But we're quite wasteful, so we need more population consumer goods to survive. We have continental preference, we prefer the world, and this is what it looks like. There's the flag. We have a democracy. We hold an election every 10 years to select a new ruler, and our edicts cost 20% less to enforce. However, we, based on a foundation of Beacon of Liberty, so we get increased unity, which is for our traditions. We like to involve our culture. We're generally happier because we're built on idealistic foundations. This is the United Nations of Earth, so it's very uplifting. We are fanatic egalitarian, which means we must be democratic and we are allowed to have utopian living standards, which is going to be great for us. Means that we also, our specialists all produce more, and we get more influence from our factions in Parliament. So that would be great. We're also xenophile, which gives us improved trade value and an extra available envoy, but it means that basically we can't do evil things to aliens that we encounter. And this is new. We have our origin. We have gone through the prosperous unification. So we start the game with 4 additional population and with 2 additional districts. Generally that's the standard starting origin. Basically, yeah, as it says, we're a disparate world that have united, and now we're ready to explore space. Now, in terms of game details, we are going with, basically, we're on a small galaxy. It says only 200 stars, and it's in the shape of a ring. But I'm decided we've got no AI empires. So we ain't dealing with opponents or enemies are out there, etc. Let alone any that have started. And the texts and traditions are really cheap. but the thing, we will have very few habitable worlds, which means that we will have to explore the galaxy to find new worlds. There's very little out there. It's more about exploring the stars. Some of the things I've got it for a very, very short game, so basically we've got to go more or less 100 years to victory on the easiest difficulty, and the empires will be based in clusters. We've got no advanced neighbours. Hyperlane density. Okay, abandoned gateways, wormhole pairs, these are all off. We've got no guaranteed world, so we're not guaranteed to find a world that is going to be colonisable within our space. But considering we've got the whole of the galaxy to explore, we will probably find at least one. So that's what we're playing with. So let's go in. Okay. Our ruler is Stellaris Mwanga. We have a representative democracy. It's governed as a representative democracy where citizens vote on officials who are elected to represent them. Much has happened since modern humans first emerged in Africa some 200,000 years ago. Our kind spread rapidly across most of the globe, and soon the first civilizations took form. Scientific progress has been swift, though not without cost. Wars claimed millions of lives even before the atom was tamed, and the turmoil of the 21st century saw the mandate of the United Nations gradually expanded in an effort to create stability. By the early 22nd century, the supranational organisation had become a de facto world government. So basically the UN is going to get expanded until it's got more powerful than the nations within it, and essentially become a government of the world. Though some still resent the power wielded by the UN, as evidenced during the Mauritian police action of '88, few can deny the technological breakthroughs that have come out of its sponsored research programs. With the recent completion of the first true starships, mankind is about to embark on a new era of space exploration. Okay, so here's our solar system now. In a change to the game, because the main part of it was always going to be surveying and exploring your system, and everybody did that, they decided to speed it up, that you start with your system basically more or less surveyed. So we're kind of skipping out on that part, and we're heading more straight to the other stars. So let's have a look, see what we got. Okay, so we have, well, we got elections, and the next one is in 2210. We get them every 10 years. But it's worth noting that Stellaris, our president, where we start with, is warlike. So our ship weapons deal more damage, and our armies deal more damage. And she has architectural sense, so we build things faster on our planets. It's not bad. There are better things we could have had in this phase, but for building up our colonies and defending ourselves, that's pretty good. So down here is diplomatic weight, but because we've not got any other empires, so we're not playing with most of the democratic stuff, we're not going to bother. Okay. Contacts. Well, basically this is everyone we've met so far. So basically this is where there's only us. We don't know anybody else. We don't know any non-players, fallen empires, primitives, others, or other empires. So it goes without saying, really. That's what we chose, that's what we got. Situation log. Now, if you remember with democracies, when you elect in a president, they get a mandate where they get bonus unity if they complete some sort of goal. In this case, it's to build research stations. So we'll be trying to build 4 research stations first, as much as possible. Okay, we have a global market, so we can buy and sell stuff that we need, so we can cover from deficits. I know that if we encounter more empires, it becomes a galactic market, but until then it's an internal market. So for the majority of this game, it will be just the internal market for us, even though we're not actually going to use it that much. You know, I kind of like the limits given a pace for the game, as opposed to, okay, we need 1 billion starships now, so I'm going to buy all the alloys I need. Which is another change, and I'll explain that later. Okay, planets and sectors. Sectors have been changed. Now, all the sectors are predefined around the galaxy, and basically as you find planets within them, you can establish them one in each sector to basically kind of automate what you actually have control of, which is useful for dealing with the new empire sprawl. I mean, right now, rather than hard limits on what the planets are and stuff, it gets more unwieldy, and we will probably want to relinquish control or create vassals or do this or do that. Okay. Expansion. Well, this is an easy way of doing colonization. It includes both planets that are surveyed, the planets that we found that have not surveyed, planets that we found that are surveyed, and planets we can colonize. It's worth noting that Mars is a barren world, but it is a terraforming candidate, so once we have the appropriate technology, we can terraform Mars into a colony. It's one of the interesting features of the Sol system where we start. But for now we'll keep that as U. Basically it turns we've got nothing to colonize. Okay, policies. Here's where we basically decide every 10 years or so. Basically you set something and you can't change it for 10 years, what our focus is going to be. Now, our diplomatic stance is on how we're dealing with the rest of the galaxy. We don't have supremacists because you need to fulfill the supremacist traditions, which basically means we're going to rule the galaxy. Cooperative doesn't give us any benefits whatsoever because we don't have any empires to interact with. Belligerent is like an aggressive form of diplomacy. Once again, it's not really good for us because there aren't really anything for us to deal with. The most it might do is it increases the fleet, the size of our navy or space fleet, but so that we can bully other people, which gives us a choice between isolationists and expansionists. Well, isolationists increase our administrative capacity and our monthly unity. Makes us basically, we're very inward looking. We can't do much with the everyone else, but then it doesn't really matter because we're not really interested. Or we can go straight for we want to grab as many worlds as possible. So expanding our star empire is where we're going to go. Now, of the two, I mean, 10% unity is okay, but it does slow down the initial expansion. And so, I mean, I tend to go as the United Nations of Earth, as isolationist, ironically, because cooperative has already been ruled out. But I think I'll keep it as expansionist for now. We have our war philosophy. Okay, a lot of these are dictated by the philosophies that we've got, by our government ethics, but we don't have any militaristic or pacifistic ethics, so we are not limited in that way. Same with orbital bombardment. Okay, however, we have resettling planets. Can we force whether their resettlement is allowed or not? To be honest, it's useful, but as fanatic egalitarians, the factions tend to resent that, so it's not worth worrying about. First contact protocol is that we will be peaceful, because we're basically, because we're not aggressive and we're not militarist, we're not going to basically declare war on everything just because it moves. Initial border status is open. It can go either way, but it doesn't really matter. Now, our economic policy is an interesting one. We have a mixed economy, which means we are balanced between doing civilian consumer goods and military space alloys. We have a choice between the two to have a focus, but if we have a focus of one, it will reduce the other by a quarter. Now, bear in mind that our consumer goods is going to be somewhat, somewhat strained as we grow, because we require more than most races. So we're going to switch to a civilian economy. We'll slow down the alloys we use for expansion, including colonising space. But it's generally good for some of the other choices that I tend to make. So we will switch to a civilian economy. We want to look after our people. And we can't change that now for another 10 years. Okay, trade policy. Basically, these policies are where we are going to direct our trade. And to do it, what we're currently on, which is the normal one, is basically you spend them on wealth. So they go straight to our energy. The more trade we got, the better. We also have consumer benefits, which basically they give us extra consumer goods, which will be useful for us, because basically it means that our trade is not just in pure wealth, but also in civilian luxuries to make things better. The other one, which is also useful for us, but probably not as useful as consumer benefits is in the beginning, is marketplace of ideas, where we earn unity by sharing our ideas throughout space. So it's kind of spreading your culture as well as spreading the wealth and everything else. But we're going to stick with consumer benefits. We're just looking for stuff to make people happy. Okay, robotic workers, we are going to keep them as allowed. Refugees, we don't have a choice, because we've not dealt with anything needing refugees yet. There are no other species in space that we know of for us to worry about refugees. Population controls, we can choose to have them if we want. That just basically controls whether we want to grow our planets or not. Since we want to since we want to grow our race, there's no point having them on and then not using them. And chances are, anyone else we encounter as xenophiles, we're going to want them to grow anyway. Basically, it's the Captain Jack Harkness approach to into galactic exploration. Basically, you know, to find new species and to sleep with them, as he would say. Go breed, go forth and multiply, blah blah blah. Slavery is banned because we're fanatic egalitarian, so we don't have slaves. And purges are banned because basically we are not allowed to engage in genocide for various species. Because we are xenophiles. We love aliens. We're not going to just basically try and wipe them out, especially if they're a sentient species. Okay, so edicts. Edicts are government-wide. Basically, government-wide policies. There is now an edict cap, but then but when you have them, a lot of the edicts that go to the cap will last until you cancel them. You need influence to change them, and the question is, do we have other things? Do we have other things we'd rather spend our influence on? Which is most certainly yes, we do. Because in terms of edicts, we almost certainly will be wanting to use influence to expand in space, and claiming new star systems requires influence. So having a nice 100 in the bank means that as soon as we get one we can expand, and we're not worrying too much about what else. So we won't be bothering with edicts. Okay, traditions. Well, traditions are really quick. As you see, we get our first one in 4 months because it's really cheap. Because we only need a quarter of what they are for us. And they fall into these 7 main branches. I'll discuss them more when we come to choosing our first traditions. Some of them are better than others. Diplomacy is pretty much pointless for us, simply because we've got no one to interact with. And as such, there tends to be a kind of universal set pattern to go about. But you can sort of tell from what they are. Every time you complete a tradition, you get an ascension perk, which basically gives us super benefits. You know, there's some of them there. We'll go into them when we get them, but there's no point showing. There's another tab though, which is relics. Apparently, you can find, and apparently, if you find a relic, you can get triumphs, which give you effects. Don't know much about that, but that's something that was added in. But there are some. But with a lot of the expansions, a lot of the content added in was fed back into the base game in some way, so you don't need the specific expansions to be able to play everything, just to get the most out of it. Okay, we have the ship designer. Seen this before. This is how we design how our ships are going to be. We've basically got corvettes and defense platforms. We don't have designs for science ships and stuff because they're all very standard based on the best stuff that we've got in terms of drives, which have all been moved to the side, you know, and it's really just the configuration of weapons, armor and other bits, really. So basically we start with corvettes and we start with defense platforms, and they're already set to the best. Auto best. Now it's worth noting, changes from the base game are quite simple. Firstly, from when I did this, now everybody gets access to the 3 main weapons types. So everyone has access to mass drivers, everyone has access to lasers. The third type, which I believe was missiles, has become something that you can add in, but because they're generally better than, they've been refitted to be better than the two basic types, people don't get to start them anyway. The other main change is now that rather than having different drive types, because you used to have wormhole generators and warp drives, now everybody uses the hyperdrive. So that bit of versatility is gone, but it does mean that the hyperlane network is now much more important and not just a niche or a hindrance to allow for better attack and defense, apparently. But either way, we're not particularly bothered because ship designs are going to be automatic for us anyway. We have a fleet manager, so that we can assign so that we can assign fleets, home bases to where they go back to, and their things for easy reinforcement. That will come in later, I imagine, as we get more fleets, because it's worth noting that fleets now also have a command limit, which is how much that the general, the admiral of the fleet, can control before it gets too unwieldy for them. And you'll notice that how fleet command limit is 20, so we can have 20 not so much vessels, but 20 power in a fleet, noting that corvettes are 1 power each, but our total capacity for naval capacity is actually 30. I know that's because of the difficulty on, we get the bonus for that, because it would be basically 1 fleet. That's your full navy sort of thing, or even less on the hard difficulties. So playing on this difficulty, we're looking probably to try and get more fleets as we need them, and basically move bits around. A bit more when we covered that. Okay, now the one we want to get to, technology. Okay, remember it's 3 branches: physics, society and engineering. There's been lots of changes to what's going on here. So let's look at first off, there's been a change in different starting text to improve what we've got, and to the various changes in the games. So we've got, in terms of physics, we have active countermeasures, which is for like point defense things. We have lasers, we have our hyperdrive, we have generator districts. Now, instead of districts, we'll be saying I'll cover when we cover planets, which I will do. But basically, you gain your money from while you can have buildings to create generators. Typically, they will be in districts, which will allow you to have more like energy worlds or agricultural worlds or stuff like that. It's basically, instead of having just a small number of buildings determine what resources you can get, on which it would kind of be like a puzzle game to place to get the most, because of the different terrains on said planet. You now actually get to choose like whether you're going to pave them in city districts or whatever. So we have the 3 basic resources of energy, minerals and food will come from 3 types of districts, with the 4th one being the city districts, and I'll cover more of them later. We've got deflectors, got reactors, fusion reactors and research labs. Research labs is a building, and is how you generate our research. I don't believe you get this specialisation buildings anymore, so it's like, okay, well, I'm going to turn this into an engineering lab. but I might be mistaken. In society we have, well, we have the Autochthon Monument to produce unity. We have hollow theatres, we have planetary government, colony ships, agricultural districts, commercial zones and strongholds. Basically the foundations, that buildings that we needed to survive as a society. And finally we have engineering, which gives us... we do have missiles if we have a missile component to... we do have the option of missiles if we have a missile component, so... Yep, we have got missiles. We have flak batteries, mass drivers, the ability to construct stations and construction ships, mining districts, resource silos, defense platforms, thrusters, basic armor, basic assault armies, basic starports, basic outposts, corvettes and science ships. So that's what we're starting with. We look at the technique. We look at how what we got in our researchers. Well, basically we want to try and match up the expertise, because it gives us a plus 15% bonus when we researching speed. So they research their research faster. So and we're researching computing. And what's interesting is, rather than upgrading buildings at the moment, most are actually... most of them actually got replaced with actually providing a flat bonus. For example, quantum theory, instead of opening up the physics labs, means that we can get a 20% bonus to physics research from all our researchers. So we're going to go with that one. Always a good place to start. In terms that we have a similar, we have industry focus for our engineering department, and they're basically engineering research. The same. As for our society, well, she is adaptable, which means she gains experience faster, so she doesn't have an expertise, but it does mean that she can pretty much get anything she wants. So yeah, we can see, I mean, it's probably worth getting society research increased. This option here will always be an option until we research it. So one of our options will always be planetary unification until we've decided to actually research planetary unification. But we're going to go with biodiversity studies. I could read you the descriptions for all these if you really want to, but we could be here a while. Okay, what the hell? You know, active countermeasures. The best defense is a good defense. Red lasers. Laser weapons fire focused beams of light at targets, causing damage through the generation of intense heat. Hyperspace travel. Like the strands of a spider web, the extra-dimensional realm of hyperspace runs between the gravity wells of most stars. Faster than light travel is theoretically possible along these hyperlanes. High energy capacitors. Capacitors capable of storing vast amounts of energy is one of the cornerstones of any modern civilization. Deflectors. Energy deflector screens can stop a limited amount of incoming enemy fire before overloading. Their main drawback is they consume large amounts of power. Reactor boosters. Additional power generation systems increase the ship's reactor output. Fission power. This energy source generates power for ships through induced fission, but it also produces harmful nuclear waste. Scientific method. Testable predictions of observable phenomena. Okay. We have social cultural history. An understanding of a shared past is necessary in order to make any significant strides into the future. Holo entertainment. Pioneering use of holographic technology allows for the creation of artificial environments that seem as authentic as the real world. It is the next step of immersive entertainment. Planetary government. Once a colony has been firmly established and pioneers turn into citizens, the need for a strong local government providing stability trumps the colonial need for flexibility. New Worlds Protocol. Calculating required resources and gear required to establish a planetary colony allows us to herd brave pioneers into grand arc ships, confident that they will survive the long voyage across the stars to a new home. Industrial agriculture. Large-scale industrial farms growing nutrient-rich produce allows a civilization to grow its population manifold. Interplanetary commerce. With new planetary markets comes new opportunities for commerce. Business will be booming. Planetary defences. There may come a time when intellects, vast and cruel and unsympathetic, regard our worlds with enmity and draw plans against us. We must be ready. Okay. Finally, engineering. Nuclear missiles. Space-to-space missiles equipped with high-yield nuclear warheads. Although based on old pre-space technology, these crude fire-and-forget weapons can be surprisingly effective at range. Flak battery. Gun batteries that fire shrapnel rounds at close range. They are particularly lethal to enemy strike craft, but can also defend against missiles. Mass drivers. These electromagnetic projectile launchers use magnets to accelerate armour-piercing rounds towards targets at high speeds. Basically, spaceborne railguns. Off-world construction. Construction in space presents our engineers with new design challenges that must be solved before we can build orbital stations above other worlds. Okay. Mechanised mining. The application of mechanical engineering to mineral extraction is a fundamental requirement for any industrial society. Industrial base. The basic industrial infrastructure that is required to become a spacefaring civilization. Which includes basically resource silos and two foundries that turn resources, i.e. minerals, into either alloys or consumer goods. Defence platform from Deep Space Defences. This will enable the construction of defensive deep space platforms to protect our starbases. Chemical thrusters. Simple yet moderately effective chemical thrusters that rely on combustible propellant to function. So that's our basically inter-system thrusters. Nanocomposite materials. Reinforced nanocomposite hull plating can provide an extra layer of protection that could be the difference between life and death in a combat situation. Interplanetary expeditionary forces. The invasion of another world is a staggering enterprise. There are immense logistical challenges that must be overcome before we can muster our first interplanetary armies. Starport. The earlier starbases were little more than makeshift outposts. Permanent starports will enable us to maintain a firmer grip on our star systems. Starbase construction. A centralised spaced installation built in close orbit around the system primary is necessary to make full use of the resources in the star system. Okay, now this is a change, and another reason why we start with a starport. And that we've got is basically the way it works now is rather than planets controlling systems and starbase and an outpost filling in the gaps, it's now outposts that control systems. And losing the starport will isolate your planets, and that is where your ships will come from. So you start with one shipyard in your first starport, but basically once that's gone, you are screwed. because there is no way to build construction ships without a starport, without a shipyard, which can only be built in a starport. So it's kind of you can't build a construction ship from a planet and then colonize the starport. So basically it's a game about protecting your starports now, much more than your planets. Although you still kind of need a planet to survive, I guess, to even be an empire. So whatever. Okay. Corvettes. The FTL breakthrough allowed early attempts to adapt traditional surface-to-space shuttle frames to military applications to finally create relatively small and manoeuvrable vessels with limited firepower. And in space exploration, the realization of faster than light travel is a new dawn for space exploration. Manned missions to other star systems are now not only possible, but necessary. Okay. That's the research technologies. If I'm going to read that out, I might as well read these out. So I'm going to go over them again. Okay, now we know which one we've chosen. Quantum theory. Exploring the mediation of fundamental forces through subatomic particles. Blue lasers. More powerful than red lasers, these blue variants emit electromagnetic radiation at a wavelength that appears blue or violet to most organics. And fusion power. Nuclear fusion processes generate a great amount of power for ships, but without many of the risks associated with fission power. Note that these two actually lead to further generations, further advances in their relative fields. So basically, if we unlock fusion power, going along the fusion tree, then we can get advancements in several other fields that require fusion power. Likewise, with blue layer, that's the energy weapons path. Doing that will upgrade our energy weapons and open up more advances for energy weapons. But we're going to stick with quantum theory. Okay. Society. Planetary unification. Ancient warring tribes, historical nations in conflict, now unified in empire. We must not, will not, crumble. Okay. Hydroponics farming. Hydroponics farming in a controlled environment allows for crops to be grown in climates where farming would normally be impossible. And of course, biodiversity studies. Studying the different forms of life that appear on our world helps us better understand ourselves and the life that surrounds us. Finally, we have afterburners. These powerful thrusters provide additional combat speed but consume a great deal of power. Carrier operations. These manned strike craft are launched from a mothership and rely on their speed and small size to survive long enough to punch through enemy defences. And nanomechanics. Advanced instrumentation allows for the study and practical application of physical systems at nanometric scales. So yeah, that is the technology. We have factions that will come up. Basically, factions will give us more influence, especially since we're egalitarian, and they will likely be based around the various principles. There's 8 of them. They kind of oppose each other. For example, you could be authoritarian or egalitarian. So it's basically whether you're a dictatorship or whether you're a democracy. Then you have xenophobe versus xenophiles. So basically whether you are for or against aliens. I want to be part of this. I'm part of space. You have militarist versus pacifist, i.e. war or peace. And then you have spiritual or material, basically wealth or culture, kind of. And they have the added advantage that materialists tend to favour robots and machines, while spiritualists tend to ban that and go more for psionics. So there are two kind of extremes in tech there are covered. Okay. This is the claim system mode, but we ain't got anything to claim. There's no one to make claims on. and there's nothing, but it does give us a quick glimpse of the galactic map, but we'll be back to that. Okay, species. Now I'm going to hide the surprise. So basically we are only going to see the species in our empire, and we are humans. As you can see, there's everything there. They have full citizenship because we're a human empire. We can set their rights and we can set default rights. Well, for default rights, which will be applied to everyone as soon as we meet them, we want them, they can become full citizens. We're xenophiles, we love, I mean, we could, if we want to, turn that down to residents, so that basically, even though they're allowed to be part of the empire, they are of less importance and cannot produce leaders. So all the people that basically in ruling positions will be human. So that means generals, admirals, scientists, governors, and the people who can be elected for presidency will all be human. But full citizen means that we can have leaders that are those that are of any species of these new species we find. Living standards. Now here we have a number. Well, basic number of conditions, some of which are like non-existent and bad, because that's if you're purging them, or if you're forcing them to be slaves or whatever. You've got decent conditions, which is your standard. Social welfare, which basically improves specialists and workers to basically give them more, but you still have a kind of you still have an elite. You have a caste system if you're authoritarian, which is a good one. One which favours scientists and rulers. The one I tend to go for, which is great, utopian abundance. Every member of this species has access to nearly any type of luxury. So that's basically everybody is equal, everybody is happy, and even if they're unemployed, they will still be happy, and they produce unity and research points. The problem is it means that our cost in consumer goods for our workers goes up from 1/4, so that's 1 per 4 workers, to 1 each. So that's quite a jump. For specialists, it goes up from 1.5, so that's 1 per 2 workers, up to 1. And of course we still keep, so basically we treat everybody like rulers, but everybody is going to be happy, and that will put a strain on our consumer goods, which is why we spent quite a bit of the options to focus on consumer goods. Right, that will change it to, that's on our default, which I put is to utopian abundance. After all, we want to be a utopia, right? Well, this one can be a utopia, we can do slaves later. Military service, everybody can become, they can not only be used as soldiers, but they can also become generals and admirals, so they can become leaders, assuming they have citizenship. Okay, that's fine. Colonization rights, they'll be allowed to colonize planets. So if we find a planet that's in our empire that's more suited to a different species, we could do a colonization with them. We don't have population control because we haven't enabled it, but that's okay because it's probably good not to have it anyway. So basically means we can't control whether they're growing or not. Migration, we could control migration. Basically it's whether they're allowed to, whether other species is allowed to leave planets for other planets in space. And because of we're egalitarian, we can't have slavery, so there's no different types of slavery to learn. And because we're xenophiles, we can't automatically purge aliens. So we're not going to enslave and we're not going to purge other species. Doesn't really do much until we decide to apply it here as well, which we're going to have exactly the same. But bearing in mind, as humans have less choices because they are our main species. So, for example, humans. Since we're a human empire, they have to have full citizenship. You can't just have humans in residence, because then you don't have an empire, basically. The living standards exactly the same. We are going to change to utopian abundance, and that will drive up how many consumer goods we need. And that change won't be reflected until the start of the next month. For military service, you have to have them to have armies, and leaders. Otherwise, we don't get like the armed forces. So that has no choice. We can't expand if we forbade colonization with this species. And obviously, population controls and migration controls, they're based on our policies whether we want them or not. And of course, we're not going to bother because we ain't particularly bothered if they migrate between worlds. You know, not that we've got any worlds to find yet, but it's still not a problem. And that's probably the biggest change in that we will make to defining how our game plays. Last off, we have our leaders, and this is what we already have. We have Omar Sassani governing the Earth sector, who is an architectural, so he also provides bonuses to buildings, so that's pretty good. We then have our scientists, and a scientist who is carefree, who will be doing our science ship. We can recruit admirals and we can recruit generals, but we won't worry about them yet. Okay, so a couple of icons up here to look at. These are our resources. You have your basic resources, which are energy, materials and food. You then have materials is then converted into consumer goods and alloys. We also have influence, which allows us to change our laws, do edicts, and we have and claim systems, and we have unity, which is basically our culture. So here we have science, and as you can see, although that's our total science, it's broken down into each of the 3 branches as such. These are strategic resources which you can find or make that provide bonuses. We'll discover them later, but they're basically volatile motes, exotic gases, rare crystals, living metals, dark matter and nanites. We have our empire sprawl, which is basically a limit to how much we can actively control. Basically, the wider our empire, the more populations, the more planets, etc., the more sprawl, and therefore the more strain it is on our resources to grow, and eventually it's going to get to a point where you're going to consider, okay, am I getting too big? Do I want to? We have envoys for diplomacy, which basically we won't necessarily be using, and of course our population. We're going to start with the 32, which is your starting 28 plus 4 for our Prospered Union. You have starbase capacity. Now, these are the number of outposts that have been upgraded. And you start with 1. You can have 3. Any more than that, it's going to start impacting on what we can do. So we could turn every outpost into a starbase, but in general, we don't want to. Because unless we actually need to for some reason, or it's desirable. And of course then there's the fleet limit. So finally we will get to This will be this is the outliner. Let's have a look at the other planets. Okay, so this is our capital, and of course everything there we get from having a prosperous union. But you'll notice the big changes here. Districts. These are the 4 districts that do up the main amount. You can only have a certain amount of farming, mining and generator districts based on how much of the land you've cleared and how many spare districts, but you can have an unlimited number of city districts. There are also special types of districts as well you can consider when you unlock them, or they come up through various planets or are added wherever. The total number of districts is also dictated by planet size, in this case up here, which is 16, and the amount that we've not allowed is here, plus how many of them are, how many districts are done by blockers. Also have trade, so our production. Now our buildings are here. So, and you'll see we have a planetary administration, administrative offices, research labs, alloy foundries, and civilian industries. So that's the basic foundations that you need, plus 2 extra slots. And what you're looking at is these provide jobs, which I'll explain in a minute. To look at the planetary features, if you remember, there was usually some sort of blockers on the original to clear out to give you more space. Now most of the planetary features determine the districts, the type of districts that you can have there. The amount of buildings is based on your population. So when we get to 35 pops, we'll have another building slot, and that can go up to a maximum of 75, which may or may not change, because I think they're working on an update regarding population as we speak. So we've got lots and lots of background. I could read this out. There's, like the Great Albertan Crater. So you got the Mauritian Security Zone and the Mesopotamian Urban Corridor. Okay, Boswash Metropolitan Accent. Basically, the entire in this thing, the corridor, the area between Boston and Washington basically becomes one giant city. You have there's the Saharan Irrigation Project and various other bits. But what we got here, these are our blockers. And when you clear them, you get bonuses. In this case, if we clear the slums, we get an extra population. Whereas if we have the clear the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, we can actually open extra. We can actually have extra farming districts. Note that these blockers also block districts as well. So if we want to get that, say the 14th district, we're going to have to clear one of these, and so forth. We have the decisions. There's not really much to do, but that's basically to do things in terms of measure, because we will come to population. Basically, this is the makeup of our population, instead, because we no longer have the grid map with what's going on in each space, so to allow for larger populations on our planets. So we have here whether population is growing. In this case, base growth is 3 points per turn. So in roughly 34 months we will get a new population. unless we can find ways to improve that. We have operation if we are able to assemble. This is if we have, like, say, a robot assembly, it will be here and determine whether we're able to build robots and what we're creating. The breakdowns will go down here along with their ethics, and then of course if there's anything that is in decline will end up here, because it's entirely possible that one species may be growing, the others may be declining as you kind of go in with colonisation. Of course that's not, but in terms of what we got here is jobs. You have the higher ruling class in the highest stratum, which basically they create, we have administrator jobs, which basically uses food and commercial goods to create unity for us and provide amenities. So that's what those jobs are doing, and they're basically the rulers of the ruling elite. Then we have specialists, or your professional tier, who generally take materials in the form of materials or consumer goods and turn them into a whole range of other stuff, depending on their job. We have researchers, which take consumer goods, I believe it's consumer goods, and turns them into research. We have enforcers, which I believe that's what they're doing. I can show you a breakdown here more what's going on. For example, our researchers, they're taking consumer goods, turning them into science. We've got 2 researchers. Our metallurgists are taking 12 materials and turning them into 10 alloys. Of course, once the modifier kicks in, that will change. We have one enforcer who basically produces unity, planetary defense armies of 2, and reduces crime. We have bureaucrats, which basically take consumer goods and turn them into administrative capacity. And we have artisans, which take materials and turn them into consumer goods. And finally we have workers, all of which basically, most of the work in the districts, although some of these can be done for buildings as well. These are like the lower classes. They basically generate your basic resources, and clerks who generate trade value and amenities and come from the city districts. Generally the population will want to kind of rise up the ranks. So if you have a spare worker job, then a specialist is going to want to go in it. If you have a spare specialist job, then a worker is going to go in it. And the lower down on the food chain, on the jobs and whatever, you get, and like some of these will be slaves or robots or whatever as well. I mean, these are the show of the actual jobs available, and it's the buildings that provide the jobs. In this case, we have a planetary administration, which is providing 2 administrator jobs and 1 enforcer job. The 2 bureaucrats come from the administrative offices. We have 2 researchers, 2 metallurgists, and 2 artisans. Looking at what we can do, we got the Autothon Monument, which can produce cultural workers jobs, which basically turn consumer goods into unity and society research. Commercial zones, which create more clerk jobs in case we run out of space in our cities to provide trade value and amenities. entertainers from hollow theatres, which concern consumer goods into Unity and amenities. You can luxury residences. If you basically need more housing with some amenities. Precinct houses are if you need more enforcers, Unity, crime, etc. More research labs, resource silos, provide clerks and increase your storage capacity. But they provide less clerks than you'd get from a commercial zone. And then of course strongholds, which you get soldiers, which increase your naval capacity and spawn extra defense armies, like the Enforcer. So if you're in a war-torn planet, you might want to plonk a stronghold down. Okay, we're not a corporation, so we don't use the corporate actions tab to show us the armies tab. What we've got is basically a rundown of, we have 2 planetary guard defense armies because of our Enforcer job, and they're humans, and we can recruit various some new ones if we wanted. We can also embark these into space if we needed to move them, stuff like that. Okay, we can have a general for the planetary guard, so a general for the planet, and general for individual invading armies. Which is interesting. Obviously it generally helps if you have a reason to invade before you build invading armies. And that's generally how the planets work. Shipyards, well basically this is an upgraded star post. Starts off as an outpost, it's gone up to a star post, as it is now I believe, star base. We can upgrade it to a starhold when we get the technology. Starholds give you the modules which allow you to do bits and buildings, so you can tailor them to what you need, whether you need it as a trade hub or whether you need it as a defensive post, or in this case whether you need it as a shipyard to build stuff with. Defences, now instead of building defensive posts with a construction ship, you build them around your defence station, and you can have currently up to 6 around there if you need to defend a contested starbase. Useful for outposts on the borders, not so much anywhere else unless you're being invaded. But it can take a lot of time to build defence platforms. And then of course the shipyard, where you build your fleets, you construct it, and your ships. So including the construction and the science ship, which is why you now start with a starbase, because there is actually no way to get an outpost from a planet. You have our military fleet. Nothing much has changed here other than the fleet manager and a couple of other options, so we can quickly reinforce our fleet. At the moment this fleet is already at full strength because although it has a fleet command limit of 20, the actual limit for this fleet is set at 3, and there are 3 corvettes, and there's 3 corvettes. So as we add more corvettes to this fleet, or we split them, we can change those limits and then do that, and then reinforce as needed. Okay, and then we finally have our civilian ships. You have your construction ship, which is pretty much unchanged, but what we are going to do first is, well, we've only got 100, it's the usual cost to do it, so we need 100, and we need more materials, because materials are used to build, basically to create alloys, to create consumer goods, and to build buildings and extraction points on various planets. So the more minerals the better. So that's what we'll be starting. And finally, we have our science ship. Now, so let's look at the galaxy map, and the big change you'll see is the hyperlane network is available to everyone and will kind of dictate where you can go. Now this is our entire galaxy, and we're that little blob there. I mean, even on a tiny galaxy of 200 stars, conquering it all can be quite, you know, a long task, to be honest. But we are dictated by, because I've set the hyperlane limit to its minimum, we will basically be, for example, in this star here, you can only reach it from here. So if we own this one and can prevent people from getting here, this one here is protected. No one can get to it unless they have something else, but most do. Same with this branch off here. See, we're basically looking at whereabouts in the hyperlane network is worth going, apart from generally everywhere. And for our first, I think what we will do is head off this way. So we'll send our first ship to go and explore that system, and we will spend our alloys on building a second science ship so that we can explore the galaxy faster, because that's what we want to do. And in general, I try to aim to have around 5 science ships, at least until I've explored the majority of the galaxy, because it gives you a lot of opportunity for growth. There's a lot going on in the galaxy, more chance of meeting stuff. It just gets things done quicker. Now what I am going to do is I am going to save it here. I know it's been a long episode of explaining pretty much everything and not really doing much, but I wanted to cover the changes between, for those who actually were following my abandoned Stellaris Let's Play. And it's a fairly complicated game, depending on how much you do. So we're going to save this game. This is going to be, yeah, why not? Okay, save game. Cheers. LP1. Technically this is the 14th time I've loaded and created a game of the United Nations of Earth. You know, it keeps records of stuff like that. But this is the first save in the Let's Play, and will be used for what I will come back to when we start playing in the next episode. Anyway, this has been Vane doing Let's Play stroke replay Stellaris, probably the first in the series, because I'll probably do something similar to what I was doing with Civilization 6. And basically expand what I'm covering in each game as new updates come out, and as we complete, and as I get feedback on whether this is the type, this is something that you'd want to see me do and would be interested in watching more of. And if you like what you see in here, be sure to like, subscribe, share and comment. Please consider sponsoring me on Patreon, and until next time, goodbye.